Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will be focused on discussing best practices for securing BYO mobile devices, enhancing protection, and real-world use cases on protecting unclassified mobile devices. My name is Kirsten Patton, and I'm the Working Group Program Manager here at ATARC. Welcome to all of our attendees, and a special thanks to JT Keating, Jim Kovach, Allison Lynch, and the rest of the Zimperium team. This afternoon, we are going to hear from our panelists, which will be followed by a Q&A where we will pop in a few polls and then answer your questions. Before we begin, I just want to encourage the audience to submit questions of their own in the Q&A section of this platform. We'll be going through them during the panel, so please send them in as we go. We'll also be popping in poll questions, so be sure to answer those in order to receive your CPE credits for attending today's session. Now, I would love to have our panelists introduce themselves. So if y'all could just come on camera. I want to share a little bit about yourself, your agency, any current projects, and really anything applicable to the topic that may be of interest to our audience at this time. Maybe we could go ahead and start with Gemma, please.
Sure. Thanks, Kirsten. Hello, everyone. My name is Gemma Howell. I'm a computer scientist in the Applied Cybersecurity Division at NIST, the National Cybersecurity Center of, National Institute of Standards and Technology. I lead mobile device security at the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. Getting my acronyms mixed up there. But at the center, we focus on, cybersecurity challenges and sharing real-world solutions. I like to think of it as us getting in the lab and putting our guidance into practice. And we do that by taking commercially available products and demonstrating how an example architecture can solve some of the cybersecurity challenges that are out there. And I'll leave it there.
Excellent, thank you. Jamie, you're up next.
Hello, thanks for having me. Jamie Williams. I work for the MITRE Corporation, where we work on various R&D and research projects for supporting the government, but also public-private interest. Particularly, I'm one of the leads for the MITRE ATARC project. This is a framework that we use to conceptualize adversary behaviors. Long story short, we look at open source threat intelligence, look at what actual real adversaries are doing in the wild, decompose those into the tactics, techniques, procedures that we can use to not only understand what's happening, but translate that to making threat-informed decisions, really understanding the threat space and what we're going to do about it in terms of architecture, configurations for mitigations, detections, any type of security decision, making sure that we're overlaying that with an understanding of why we're actually making those decisions. I'll drop the links to ATARC in the chat, but really awesome, thankful to be here and really looking forward to this discussion.
Fantastic, thank you. JT, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time to hop on with this. This is the brainstorm behind this is the fact that Zimperium has received an awful lot of questions. There's a lot of buzzwords floating around with regards to BYOD, zero trust, et cetera, et cetera. So we wanted to come in and have the experts demystify it. I've been doing cybersecurity for a better part of 25 years now, all on the endpoint side of the world. Before that, I was actually part of a group for Pacific Bell and then SBC that built cellular networks. And so between mobile and endpoints, I've been in and around this for quite some time. So looking very forward to the conversation. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you. And over to you, Rick.
All right. I'm Rick Simon. I'm a project manager at the Defense Innovation Unit in Mountain View, California. DIU was established in 2015 by then Secretary of Defense Ash Carter. And he recognized that the private sector invests 10 to 100 times as much in certain critical technology areas as does the government. And, areas like AI and autonomy and space and cybersecurity are all good examples of that, where the private sector investment exceeds that of the public sector. So our mission is to solve national security problems using commercial off-the-shelf technologies, understand the unmet military needs, find companies with technologies that can address them, prototype the technology, and then bring successful prototypes into production and into the military. Cybersecurity is one of those areas. Properly applied, it can solve military problems just as well as it can solve commercial problems. So that's the area that I'm part of. And I have a project that's pretty relevant to this conversation that I wanted to outline just for a second. The project objective is to provide secure, controlled access to DoD's cloud services directly over the internet using zero trust principles. In today's DoD, users outside the network have to go into the network, take a hairpin turn out of the network to get to those cloud services, and it's really inefficient. So that's what this project is all about. But what's interesting about it and how it connects to this topic here is that it's taken a very interesting turn. Its main focus has been on that alternative ways to secure the pathway from endpoint devices to cloud services, but the security of the devices themselves, and in particular BYOD devices, courtesy of the pandemic, have really become a big topic of conversation, and a lot of analysis work is being done to try to figure out ways to address that. BYOD devices aren't monolithic. That part-time contractor for the DoD on a Windows XP system is a heck of a lot different than a reservist who has a company-owned device that's security controlled by, let's say, Bank of America, his daytime employer. But from the point of view of the DoD, they're both BYOD devices. And the question is, how do we provide differential policy access to those two different kinds of BYOD devices as they're trying to access DoD networks? So I'm sure we'll get into, BYOD devices aren't monolithic, which I think will be a pretty fun topic. The other thing I wanted to mention about the project that has become abundantly clear is that in a zero trust world, policy is everything. Heck, this is the DoD. The DoD's got a policy for anything and everything, and there's generally 20 of them for any one thing. They cover a broad range of areas. They're enforced everywhere, and trying to apply those in a zero trust type of technology is a really, really hard thing to do. Inconsistencies abound, and it's easy to get things wrong. So as the DoD moves to a zero trust architecture, I think that's going to be a huge area of need, trying to figure out how to manage policies in an effective manner.
Absolutely. And we'll jump into zero trust in a little bit as well for those who are wanting to hear more about that. We'll go ahead and knock out our first poll question. If we could please get that up, and remember to answer that if you'd like to receive your CPE credits. But it's just a poll on understanding, in your opinion, how far along is your agency in your BYO initiatives? Are you far along, somewhat there, need some help, or no plan in place? And while we have folks at home answer that, Gemma, I would like to turn it over to you, and was wondering if you could please share a high-level overview for our audience of the NIST practice guidance and the purpose behind this document.
Sure. So earlier this year, around March, we released NIST Special Publication 1822. We released it as draft out for public comment, and that document is titled Mobile Device Security for Bring Your Own Device, or BYOD, specifically talking about what we're talking about here today, the Bring Your Own Mobile Device. In that document, we outline, what is a BYOD deployment, what are the potential security concerns and privacy implications of a BYOD deployment, what are some mobile device security technologies that you could use to address those security concerns and privacy implications, and those technologies are EMMs or UEMs, mobile application vetting, mobile threat defense, virtual private network, and trusted execution environment, or TEEs. One other aspect that we included in the practice guide was a supplemental document that actually shows how a fictional company went through the process of a BYOD deployment. And it really walks you through kind of their mindset, understanding the use case, how they were able to utilize the cybersecurity framework and the privacy framework in their process for deploying doing a BYOD deployment, and then also how the example architecture kind of met their security goals for BYOD.
Great, thank you for sharing that. And I'm curious to hear from the panelists as well. What are some of the business drivers to BYOD? Jamie, do you want to cover that one first?
Oh yeah, this is a big one. And that's just, it's the evolution of natural technology where, I am probably in no part of the day very far, but no further than 5 feet from my phone. So even, even if it's a situation where, I'm in a secure facility and I shouldn't bring my phone, it's something that, it's, the way the world is evolving, it's just something you're gonna have to deal with. And I think it really does, whether or not we are kind of, already adopting BYOD, this area and these concepts of, how we define our perimeter are really changing, whether or not, we do have a solid in place BOD strategy. A lot of the, the services that our corporations may be providing may be accessible via the internet, and employees may be already accessing those via their personal devices. Or, like Rick said, there might be other applications beyond just personal devices where we see, warfighter or vehicles or IoT and all this other infinite realm of, technology and devices. All those are interconnected. So whether or not we're ready for it and we actually have a policy for it, it's a part of the world as we know it. So it's really good. I really did appreciate the NIST documentation to, not only introduce, the formality of understanding the problem, but walking through some examples on, what does this look like and what are some of the situations and considerations that we should take as we kind of, venture into this new space.
Absolutely. Are there any other panelists who want to weigh in on business drivers?
I'll weigh in because we have customers all around the world that are implementing this side of things, and for me, the pandemic clearly accelerated things, right? It accelerated things because it was, I sometimes think about triage doctors versus plastic surgeons, right? When the pandemic hit, everybody was in triage mode because all of a sudden nobody could come in the office, but everybody had to keep working. And so they had to start working from any devices that were available. And so as the folks have been talking about already, a lot of those were BYOD, whether it's traditional laptops or mobile. I know we're going to get into some of the productivity apps where there are certain apps that everybody expects to be able to have access to from pretty much whatever they're doing. And then I think there's other elements that come into it. Are you using a personal device potentially for authentication? So are you using it as the key, even if you're not putting productivity apps on it, is another component behind this whole thing. So I think that and then there's the practical reality. And I do think it depends, and Rick can definitely comment on this. That's related to what both Gemma and Jamie were talking about as well. There is no one size fits all. If you're in a highly classified organization, you're going to have different drivers and different inhibitors to something like BYOD. If you're in civilian organizations or things on those lines, it becomes different. And the closer you get to that latter bucket, the user is more in control than we'd like them to be in terms of, I'll be an employee, but I want my Apple device, for instance, not what you choose to give me. So I think sometimes it's even gets down to who's going to work for you and who won't work for you based on flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rick, I don't know if it was you that mentioned it before, or JT, but warfighters needing devices to remain secure. Can you expand upon that a bit more?
Yeah, sure. The communication is really important in within the DoD in the battlefield and back home. When a couple things. One, when the pandemic started, it was called a stop movement order, and everybody basically went home and stayed home. And the DoD is designed in a perimeter security manner. It was a network that was designed 40 plus years ago, and it's perimeter security oriented, and in fact has hardware VPNs, which was sort of normal back in the day, but it isn't particularly normal anymore. And it became very difficult to communicate, both between people in the Pentagon and out in the battlefield. And so as JT was saying, it's triage time. You grab what you can to provide communications, and that not only goes to the endpoint devices, but also to the technologies you use to communicate. When you can't get into the Pentagon to the DoD network because you're limited by hardware VPN capacity, you got a problem. And so the triage for the DoD was to create was to leverage cloud services to allow for that communication and limit as much as possible the way in which BYOD devices could be used. But the fact is that they had to be used. And sorting out today and tomorrow how to use those BYOD devices and how to control them to the level that the DoD requires is a big challenge. Yeah.
So, Gemma, based off your findings in the NIST practice or research in general, what are some of the major threats that government is faced with when it comes to BYO devices?
That's a good question, and the specifics around government I may steer towards towards Rick, but what we look at within our research is kind of mobile threats in general to any organization, any more mobile threats at all. We actually have a mobile threat catalog, which focuses on threats specific to mobile devices. And some of the threats that we highlight in our practice guide are some of the common threats, things like a simple lost or stolen device, but also getting into malicious apps and things like that may show up on your device. So it certainly varies. We went through about 12 of them. I'm not going to name all of them here for you all, but there's a lot of threats out there, and I don't want to say that some are more common than others, but the ones that we include in the practice guide, those 12 threat events, are the ones that we found as the highly likely threats. Some of the couple that I mentioned just now.
So then I want to expand upon the threats and ask, what do we do to solve this and mitigate that risk? And I'll turn it over to all of our panelists because you each have interesting perspectives on that. So Jamie, do you have anything you'd like to add to that question?
Oh, absolutely. And I think I agree exactly as you said. And the problem really comes down to what I shared earlier is understanding, not only what your threats are capable of now, but as you deploy things and as you make new decisions, as you make new configurations, whether it's zero trust or BYOD, understanding that that's not just a purchase, plug and play and forget about it kind of solution. You really do have to really understand that system, watch it over time, and build those layers of defense, understanding, this is what this solution is meant to do. And like Rick said earlier, it's not something that you just, you don't throw an appliance out there. It's really a policy. It's something you need to implement over time and make sure it's actually functioning the way it should. But then also bake in those layers underneath and understand, okay, now that this thing should work the way it does, but we've seen threats target MDM. It's a really great solution, but we've seen threats, use an open source MDM to, hijack and, compromise initial devices, but also targeting the control plane and, target those MDM servers and use that to spread laterally in an environment. So really just, putting on that creative hat and thinking of it from the adversary perspective to really decompose, every potential situation, prioritize those and kind of, put that lens of, likelihood. And then for every one of those situations that really does have an outcome that is unsustainable for you, really make those tough decisions on what are we gonna do about it? What are the technologies in place, but what are also the processes in place? How do we respond to these breaches? How do we respond to a campaign? And really making sure, holistically, we have a good idea of what our defenses look like.
I have a few things just to add on to that, Kirsten. I completely agree with what both Gemma and Jamie have talked about. To me, I kind of boil it up just a little bit. First of all, the guidelines are awesome. That they're very discrete recommendations. They're great. So is the MITRE ATARC framework. I mean, anybody who's doing an EDR or anything for years, and like I said, I'm old, I've been doing it for a long time. The MITRE ATARC framework is fantastic. The fact that Jamie and his cohorts have extended it into the mobile attack framework, because as a general rule, most of the attack types, like Gemma was saying, are very similar, but there are some that are unique, right? And I boil it up, and basically there's 4 attack types, right? There's device compromises, jailbreaks, etc. There's networks, either risky or malicious, and I'll come back to why I'm saying risky or malicious apps, mobile phishing. Those are, when you boil up the 12, like, what Gemma was talking about, in ours, it's like, I think we have like 60 or something, some odd different granular threats in there. To me, there's risks and there's attacks. Risk means you've actually made yourself more likely to get attacked and or an attack to be more successful. And an attack is actually an attack, right? So an example of risk that is particularly noteworthy in the mobile side is device risk. We are so used to having on traditional endpoints the ability to push out patches centrally. There is no central patch management system in mobile, whether it's BYOD or corporate. This is one of the things that scares the crap out of everybody in the security business. If you ask all of us who've been doing this for a while, what's the single biggest risk in an organization? The answer is and has always been a carbon-based life form. Human beings make really dumb decisions. Well, guess what? The human being is now, they're the admin of the device. They decide when they're going to patch on mobile. They decide what networks they're going to connect to. They decide what apps they're going to download. So it's a very, very different ball game, and you kind of have to account for all these different pieces. So just for what it's worth, that's just kind of my thought. Rick, any other thoughts on this whole topic?
You bet. So you mentioned risks versus attacks, and with most companies, and the DoD certainly has MDM technology to help manage risk of endpoint devices. But we recognized about 3 years ago that mobile device attacks were also commonplace, and warfighters have to deal with the same types of attacks on those endpoint devices as anybody else would. And so we started a project to, DIU started a project to prototype alternative ways to protect endpoint devices from attacks. And I'm not plugging Zimperium here, but they were successful in their prototype, and in fact they did go into a production contract with the DoD to protect endpoint devices from attacks. I guess that was kind of a plug, wasn't it?
Well, and I appreciate it, Rick, but I think the other thing that's inherent in what you're talking about, this is something that we're going to get to poll results, obviously, but with the folks that are kind of new and building their practices, whether it's on BYOD or mobile in general, you have to go through certain learning curves, right? Just like we do with any of this stuff. And one of the questions that used to be asked a lot, Gemma, I know that you dealt with this, is, well, if I have an MDM, I'm already covered, right? And the fact is, MDMs, and we partner with all the major MDMs, MDMs were designed predominantly around 2 things originally. if my employee gets fired or loses their phone, how do I get my stuff off that device? That was what they're originally built for, right? That we do threat detection, they do management. We are the smoke detector, they are the sprinkler system. So you kind of need both of them, but that's inherent in what you were just talking about, Rick. So, but thanks for the plug that you didn't do.
No problem.
Gemma, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say the bring your own device scenario has also, and the reason why I brought it up earlier, those security concerns and the privacy implications, because typically for a corporate-owned device, that belongs to the organization. They're able to do whatever they want with it. This is your device. And your personal information is on this device. And so making sure that you create that separation from your work and your personal is really important. And I just want to highlight that the importance of really taking the time to think about, not only securing your organization's information, but also the privacy of the employee, and making sure that separation is there. Definitely something to think about with these BYOD deployments.
Absolutely. I think it's time for our next poll question. If we could please get that popped up on the screen. So speaking of, how familiar are you with ATARC for mobile? Not at all, you've heard of it, you use it somewhat, or you use other parts of ATARC, but not mobile. So let's go ahead and answer that one. Our audience at home, don't forget if you want to get your CPE credits. Since we have that poll, Jamie, was there anything else that you wanted to add about the ATARC Mobile, or anything you'd like our audience to be aware of?
No, like I said, it's available. It's something that we're trying to continue to grow, and I do recognize most people on this call have made great contributions to the growth of the model. So just wanted to point out, it's not something that MITRE is doing just to prescribe things to you. It's very much a community effort. We do our research, we document what we can find, but we also take contributions from anyone in the space who has a lot of expertise or insights. So definitely just an open door in terms of hopefully what we're trying to build is a collective body of knowledge on what's happening in this space, exactly as JT just said, understanding what do the attacks look like. Let's translate that to the risk, and then as Jim and Rick said, let's use that to make these threat informed, really strong, very sound decisions on what we actually do. Now, piggybacking on something that JT said, I really love is, even I come from a more traditional PC background, but exactly as you said, a lot of the same paradigms carry over where, even in a very, monolithic, Windows environment, the biggest things we struggle with in terms of security are change and asset management, which I think mobile just introduces on a whole new scale. So, and, exactly as Jim said, the privacy concerns are a real big thing too, where we can't, even if we're introducing, obviously in a perfect world, we'd monitor our users to the point of them making no mistakes. That's not a reality. But also, with this like dichotomy of, a personal owned device also hosting access and potentially private data, the risks spill over between those two. An employee takes their device out into the real, the rest of the world. They maybe get exposed to things. They introduce that back to your environment. And then the inverse. We've seen situations where, as an organization, they didn't configure their situation correctly and introduced, their employees' devices to vulnerabilities as they took that out into the exotic environments of the world. So just making sure that, I think it's a really tough problem. And, that's really the beauty of what we're trying to do with ATARC is, bring all this knowledge that we have collectively in the, as a community together in one place that we can kind of, write things down, actually, start to center around one body of knowledge that actually helps us push us hopefully in the right direction.
Excellent. So we had a couple of audience questions come through. I think we can knock them out pretty quick. Does 1800-22 cover also BYOAD? And if so, what is BYOAD?
I'm not sure. Does anyone on the panel know what BYOAD is?
Is that like Active Directory or?
Maybe the audience member, Reginald, if you could elaborate a bit on that in the approved.
Approved. It does not cover that specific deployment. And that's a good question. in a separate document, 800-124 revision 2, we talk about the different deployments, and we call that one choose your own device. And so there's a list of approved devices that you can choose from, a list of approved devices that you can choose from, and then kind of the organization specifies, and then you can choose your personal device based on that list. We do not get into the specifics there, but we do mention that specific type of deployment in another document.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim, for clarifying. That's DoD speak. And then the other one for you, Gemma, do you have a list of the BYOD MDMs you have tested to include the results report? And if you could direct them to where they could find that.
In the BYOD practice guide, we used Mass 360. That was the example EMM that we used. But again, it's just an example solution. So you can interchange whatever EMM or UEM that you decide. In the previous practice guide that we did, corporate owned, personally enabled, in that practice guide, we used Mobile Iron in our example solution. So those are the two that we've shown in our examples, but certainly I want to reiterate that our solutions are modular and meant so you can choose whatever solutions work for you, not specifically endorsing the ones that we put in the practice guide, just showing you an example of a real world option.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so moving on, I know we're going to want to talk about best practices and challenges, but how about zero trust? And JT, I want to turn it over to you. How does zero trust play into BYOD? And with that, could you also start by giving a high level definition of what zero trust is for those who are unaware?
Yeah, absolutely. Just as as soon as I started talking about buzzword bingo and zero trust, you could see all the panelists all started cracking up, and I think I saw minimally Rick reach for the Advil. So zero trust is I'll say what it is by also talking about what it isn't. But by the way, quick going back one step. One of the things I do love about the ATARC framework, just for what it's worth, I'm just going to kind of put it out there. It's not just because Jamie's cool, which is true, but is most of the mandates that you'll come across are prescriptive and say this is what you shall do this in order to be compliant, for instance. What I love about the ATARC framework is it literally looks at it from the attacker's side of things. When I'm not doing software companies, I like coaching football, and one of the ways of winning football is to do scouting reports. You need to know what the other team is all about in order to figure out how to counteract it. So that's just a plug, since that's what we're doing now, Rick. We're plugging, right? We're plugging the guidelines, we're plugging the ATARC framework. By the way, big fan of DoD. Just thought I'd throw that out. But it's a great framework. Back over to zero trust. Zero trust is a framework. It's not a product. Nobody can tell you, just like nobody can say, hey, you buy our stuff and you're instantly HIPAA compliant. That's false. Walk away from anybody who says that. Zero trust is a framework that is basically saying, this is even before the pandemic, but it has been accelerated on steroids because of the pandemic. Rick even nailed it just a little while ago in terms of his discussion. What it basically says is, I'm not going to trust anything. I'm not going to trust anybody. And what I'm going to do is, on the fly, and I'm going to oversimplify it. This is my opinion, but I'd love everybody else's opinion. On the fly, based on minimally two things, I'm going to decide what resources I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you access to, right? Minimally, the two things are, what do I know about the user? So what do I know about the user? What kind of user behavior? What is the snapshot? What is the grand set of things they're supposed to have access to and not have access to? So there's user elements. Then there's device risk elements. What is the state of the device itself that is coming in? This has nothing to do with mobile or traditional. It's overall to start off with. But I'm going to take these two things. What do I know about Gemma? What do I know about where she is physically, what she's supposed to access, everything? And what do I know about Gemma's device? And based on those two, on the fly, and as Rick was joking about, most likely not tunneling back through one spot with a hardware-based, solution, quite often I'm going to decide what cloud-based access, cloud-based resources I'm going to give you access to. So BYOD would actually start factoring into, okay, we don't own this device, but depending on what your policies are, you can start cycling back and saying, okay, now I know it's Gemma. Now I know she's on her personal device. Is that device compromised? Is it jailbroken? Is she setting on a bad Wi-Fi? Depending on those answers, I give her access to the apps. And so the question that was asked about the MDM, I think is going to be fun, Gemma, when we come back to, because as we've been kind of structuring this conversation for people, it's been, what are the business case? Why are people going to BYD in the first place? What kind of threats are we facing? Now you start getting into, okay, what do I do about it? And the what do I do about it, depending on your answer here from Zero Trust, the actual answer might be an MDM, but for multiple reasons, including privacy, like Gemma is talking about, it might be more mobile access management. It might be a MAM solution or something that's more in Zero Trust, where we're not trying to control the whole device. We're literally just saying, hey, based on the condition of Gemma's device, she doesn't get access to her email until she gets off the bad Wi-Fi or something along those lines. So hope that helps. But I mean, I'd be interested in everybody else's opinion as to how they would vary the buzzword bingo of Zero Trust.
I think you hit the nail with the hammer on that one. Is I think one of the biggest roadblocks we've seen to Zero Trust is exactly as you said, understanding. A lot of people, it comes off as buzzwords. We've seen products, sling, the silver bullet to solve all your problems. And you're, like you said, really, it's, and it's funny too, because when you unpack Zero Trust as you just did, it's really not different from a lot of principles, other principles you've adopted, such as like least privilege. It's really kind of conceptually that same thing, which I don't think a lot of people would argue with. But I really, just to kind of, one thing I wanted to note on what you said was really getting back to your sports analogy. Traditionally, we've always thought about security as us versus them, like in versus out. Whereas, like you said, that's not based on business use cases. That's not the way the world works, and that's not how we can think about cybersecurity. There's not this perimeter that we can just define where you're either in or you're out. We need to really think of things a little bit more gray. And, exactly as you said, it's, both the way that these devices will be used and the way we need to secure them needs to be very fluid and very dynamic. Like you said, I love that instant, decisions based on, not just, I know that device, so it's okay, but, there's so much data that we have access to and actually using that to make these really good decisions. So, big foot stomp on everything you said. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
So one comment I wanted to make about Zero Trust being it's not a set of stuff that you pick up, that you buy and instantaneously you're Zero Trust. Very profound observation from a guy I know that used to be the chief security officer at Palo Alto Networks, Rick Howard. He said, you know what, most companies have about 90% of the technology they need to deliver a Zero Trust network. They just need to think about it differently and frame the challenge in a Zero Trust fashion, and then take the tools they already have and start using them thusly. And I thought that was really a pretty profound way to look at that. The other comment I wanted to make is that the trust pillars of users and devices are two, but there are actually a couple more. There's the network or the environment that you are coming from and going to. What application and workload are you going after, and what is the data that you're trying to get to? And so those are all trust pillars. And in a perfect Zero Trust world, you'd kind of score all of that and grant access based on some sort of scoring mechanism. I think it's hard to do, but that's I think the way you'd want to, the place you'd want to get to at some point.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. It would kind of you guys are all kind of touching on, understanding the security posture of the user, of the device. Something that I wanted to mention about Zero Trust is, at NIST, we've put out documents, both at the center that I work at and also in the General Computer Security Division around, Zero Trust architecture. And people hear that and think, there is an architecture out there that is the answer. But we're very quick to say, it's a strategy. These are principles that you apply to your architecture. The overall is kind of that never trust, always verify. Verify, establish policies for the users, for devices to kind of run through those checks, make sure you understand the security posture, and then continuously monitor those devices and scanning those devices to understand, have they broken from their original I want to say baseline view, or is there any interesting behavior? And that kind of gets back to that EMM, UEM, and MTD kind of combo where you're able to kind of have the MTD scan the device and it constantly monitor what's on the device, and then the EMM or UEM able to kind of check the policies, understand, has the device broken from what it's normally its normal state? Do we need to cut access or restrict access or block it from accessing any of the organization's resources? So I feel like I'm just repeating everything you guys are saying, but all good points on the around Zero Trust.
One thing I wanted to point out and also just like run by this group for perspective is one thing, unfortunately, fallacy we very often see is, security bending based on usability. So, some of this stuff may seem on paper really awesome. You implement it and, users complain, it gets in the way. They're like, this is like a hassle. Either they complain it out of the door or they find ways to subvert it. So just curious, especially looking back to Rick's example of, personally as a user, I would rather go, type a token into my phone and do a couple extra steps to be secure, vice the situation you described of, VPN into environment and then pivoting from there and logging in somewhere else. Or, other cases just, hey, you can't use your phone. I think majority of users would probably go for, exactly as you just described, Gemma, those extra steps in order to, make my life a little easier, but also, kind of have the peace of mind that, I'm not doing anything wrong and really jeopardizing my organization.
Rick, you want to take the first shot?
Well, it's pretty funny, the default position for the DoD is no BYOD devices. We want to completely control everything. That's the instinctual approach to protection, and it's a method that is pretty proven. But the world we live in now isn't going to allow that to continue forever, and so that is the struggle of a struggle that the DoD is having from an IT point of view. Gemma, you mentioned that there is no, I think you said there is no Zero Trust reference architecture that is the golden thing. Actually, the DoD just published that in February. So there, and it's more it's called the DoD Zero Trust Reference Architecture version 1.0. And so it's more a guidepost for entities to get to within the DoD. But it, for us, you have a perimeter-based network architecture that's been in place for 40 years. Hard on the outside, chewy on the inside, and moreover, you have 7 different service branches that have all implemented it kind of differently. And so imagine if you're in a company and each department decides to build their own network. Well, you have a little bit of that going on with, between the branches. And so moving from, that kind of environment, perimeter-based environment to zero trust environment is really quite an undertaking. But you know, we're on the path now.
You know, I think about Jamie's the macro point that Jamie is talking about in terms of we've always had the teeter-totter, right? You know, high security versus high user flexibility and choice. We've always, you know, kind of been doing this. What becomes very interesting in this BYOD conversation, and Gemma teed it up, is in addition to the part that leans towards the user in terms of, hey, I want my own flexibility, I want to be able to do myself. Another weight that gets put on that side is the privacy piece, right? Where it's like, well, this is my device. And part of why privacy becomes so huge in mobile is, you know, kind of why did MDMs get created in the first place? I mentioned it's like if I lose my phone, I get fired. But if you even kind of step away from it a little bit, architecturally, one of the differences between mobile and traditional endpoints is on mobile, all the apps are in their own little bucket. They're in their own little container, and apps don't get to play around with other apps. And that is great from a security standpoint. But corporations and government agencies basically told the mobile OS manufacturers, well, we're not going to allow anybody to do anything on mobile if I can't take some action. So as a way of kind of being able to sell to agencies and sell to corporations, Apple and Google and companies said, okay, we're going to let one app be the super app. And that's an MDM, which is part of the UEM that Gemma was talking about. But they, as I think, almost in a way where it was kind of Apple and Google kind of playing around a little bit, but also whenever you install an MDM, you get the scariest message on the planet. It basically says by installing this, your organization can see your contacts, can see your phone, can get your first kid. You know, I mean, it's like, it's all this messaging that scares the crap out of everybody, which is a major reason of why MDMs have struggled, I think, Gemma, in addressing BYOD initially, was because it's so scary when you get it. You're like, no, this is my device. But it's again kind of that, it's layering on, Jamie, what you're talking about of user control and user capability, as demonstrated by Rick. Even in the DoD, you're getting some of that. And you can't just go with you will have it anyway. You can have it any color you want as long as it's black. Isn't that the Henry Ford comment way back in the day? So, but yeah, totally agree with y'all.
And that translates to the threat space as well, because the majority of, persistent actors we see in the space are targeting, just like you said, the nature of the personal device is going to be very personal. Thinking about what you have on a PC versus what you have on your phone, you're talking like, financials, information about your family, all this type of information that's just gonna, these threat actors are like craving over that and really exploiting that. So it really does, that complete picture of, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, but also, what are we really defending against? There's a lot of threads, exactly as you pointed out, that are really interconnected there. Why this makes, such a sensitive and really critical issue.
Yeah.
I thought this was an interesting audience question that came through. Panelists, feel free to jump in. Can non-tech related small businesses ever achieve a zero trust environment, or is it something only achievable by bigger companies with more mature IT and security teams?
I mean, just as an analogy, I think you could even do zero trust like in the real world, like, opening a door or not. I mean, it's like I said, it's not a technical problem. It's a philosophy that we apply to, technical mechanisms. So, thinking about, the doorbell rings and you opening it or not, I mean, that could be implemented via zero trust. Like I could see Gemma and say, hey, I know who that is. Hey, what were you doing this afternoon at 1:30 to 2:30? There's all that dynamic fluidity that we can actually apply. And I like I said, my personal opinion is it's exactly as we said, it's more of a policy, it's more of a way of thinking by something that, is going to have a price tag or, a level of sophistication kind of strapped to it.
Yeah. Just like lean methodology is not just for construction, you can apply it to other industries as well. Anyone else have anything they want to add?
I would just kind of layer on kind of what Jamie was talking about, both here and then also Rick, when you were talking about, you can achieve elements of zero trust with stuff you already have in place if you just think about it a little bit differently. There's a lot of the technologies that people are sitting on already, and it's just a matter of just kind of tweaking it a little bit. So yeah, I think it can be done, but I also think it's one of those things where, like, we started this whole conversation on why am I doing it in the first place? Why am I doing BYOD in the first place? Why are you doing zero trust in the first place? It's always, if there isn't a compelling business reason and some data that needs to be protected, then maybe you don't have to. But if you do have a compelling reason and data you need to protect, which most companies do, I think you can just tweak some existing investments to pull it off.
Yeah, great question. We need to put up our last poll question before we run out of time. I want to make sure we all get our credits for attending today. How confident are you in your agency's ability to ensure that BYOD is secure? Are you very confident, quite confident, somewhat confident, slightly, or not at all? So please take a moment and answer that. On that note, Rick, I wanted to ask, could you please speak to the need for mobile security in BYOD? And I'm alluding to a certain example, such as Microsoft 365. If you could maybe explain to our audience how that all ties together.
When the pandemic began and we had troubles communicating between all members of the DoD, we set up an instance of Microsoft 365. It's called something else in DoD speak, but it's Microsoft 365, and allowed people to gain access to it both from their GFE equipment and their BYOD devices. And so that's actually been in place for the last year or so. It's about to shut down. It's going to be replaced by an instance of Microsoft 365, but within the DoD network, not accessible over the open internet. But the BYOD question related to that is still open. It's how will users be able to gain access to that on their personal devices?
So quickly, I do want to do a fire round of audience questions before we come to the end of our panel. But on that note, any insight from our panelists on best practices agencies can implement for securing BYOD mobile devices?
Gemma, do you want to start as the author supreme of said question?
Yeah. Best practices kind of include, a lot of what we talked about here, understanding the use case, why you're doing BYOD, what you're going to be using the devices for, performing a risk assessment, kind of understanding the potential threats, whether that be security or any privacy implications. And then from there, kind of understanding what mobile device security technology that you need to address those threats. So getting back to a lot of what we talked about here, the MDM, EMM, UEM, whatever acronym you want to use, some type of mobile device management tool, a mobile application vetting solution, a mobile threat defense. Those are just a few of the things that we talk about in the guide. I think I'll cut it short there. And for more information, certainly take a look at that practice guide 1800-22.
Great, thank you. So audience questions, let's try and get through as much as we can, but I want to save time for panelist takeaways. Which elements of zero trust do you think are the first that a small organization should consider? JT, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I think the first thing is, and Rick alluded to this a little bit. We hear about EDR, endpoint detection and response, for instance, right? That's traditional endpoints is where most people think of traditional laptops, desktop servers. Nobody has an endpoint that doesn't have some form of of threat detection capability on it or management capability on it. So I would start the exact same way even here when it comes to zero trust. Make sure that you have an ability to detect things, and then make sure you have an ability to actually decide on the fly based on what you're detecting what resources you're going to give access to. And kind of going off of something Gemma was saying, there's mobile device management, and then there's mobile application management. Device management, you're trying to manage the entire device. Mobile application management, like you have around O365, that Rick was talking about. When you come into Outlook, based on the condition of the device, you can decide if you're going to give people access to Outlook. So it's a very straightforward baby step towards zero trust, but dealing with kind of that inherent nature of what's going on in the device and making the decision on the fly. So that'd be my relatively quick answer.
Great, thank you. Jamie, you were nodding your head. Did you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything JT just said. The only thing I would add would be, kind of piggybacking on, some themes we've seen from like Rick and Gemma and JT would be, understanding, especially for something like zero trust, understanding what those access points look like. Like if you stand up at Office 365, what does access to that look like? And exactly as JT said, what data am I collecting from that access point? Do I understand how this is accessible from internal, external? But then, also layering that with what Gemma said, one of the themes I was picking up on was enforcement. All this stuff is great, but also making sure it's actually being deployed universally across all our devices we care about. That's something we struggle with in the traditional PC world, but also probably it's exaggerated with mobile, where understanding all these things coming from nowhere. That's probably just a recipe for a bad thing to eventually happen.
Absolutely. So in the interest of time, we're going to send the rest of the audience questions to our panelists, and then we can include them in a wrap-up email so that we can get all of your questions answered. But we are running up against time right now. What I wanted to do is hear from each of our panelists as far as a takeaway from this discussion and anything else that you want to leave our audience with. Pretend it's the last panel you'll ever do, which it won't be, but let's just pretend. What do you want to leave our audience with? And maybe we could begin with Gemma, please.
Yeah, so I know we talked a lot about things to worry about when it comes to BYOD and mobile devices and the potential threats. But I do want to say, that there are technologies out there that can help you build your secure environment to securely deploy BYOD devices and to incorporate that zero trust kind of framework into your deployment for BYOD devices. One of the questions that I get a lot is, how does your BYOD example tie into zero trust? And I think we've said it a few times here that a lot of the tools that are, or the examples that I talk about within the guide and the examples that folks are using in their current environment all have some of the capabilities that can be used to get you to that zero trust kind of architecture, strategy, mentality, framework, whatever you want to call it. And so, just make sure to think about that as you're going through. And with BYOD devices, there is I can't reiterate enough there. You should always consider your security as well as the privacy implications or for the employee.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gemma. And over to you, Rick.
Yeah, a couple takeaways from my point of view. I think endpoint devices of all stripes will become more and more sophisticated in the way in which they separate your work life from your private life, and that this is going to get sorted out. It's a little messy right now, but I do think it's going to get sorted out, and you're going to be able to flip your environment from work to play pretty easily on your mobile devices at some point in the future. So that'll all be a good thing. That's one thing. The second thing is I think zero trust is a journey. You can't do it overnight. You just keep layering on pieces of that zero trust mentality until you're there, and it is a journey. Then the last thing is actually, I'm actively working on trying to figure out what this continuum of trust that you have for BYOD devices. I mentioned it right at the beginning, and I'm gonna Google BYOAD because I want to know more about that.
Thank you, Rick. And over to you, Jamie.
2 points. The first of which I think is just piggybacking on dovetailing what Rick just said is, it might seem like a lot of information is floating around, a lot of really great ideas. Don't get overwhelmed. Just make one good decision at a time. And like you said, and kind of trust the process. And the other one, putting my attack hat back on, and JT described this perfect earlier. Think about your adversaries because they're thinking about you. Anything you're doing, just kind of walk through that kind of at least tabletop mental experiment of where does this put me? How does this kind of relate back to how this potentially could go bad, but also appreciating the benefit of all the decisions you make.
Awesome, thank you, Jamie. And JT, over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you, ATARC, and thank all the panelists. I've enjoyed this. I mean, I've enjoyed all of our interactions with each other. So I don't know if anybody else did in terms of the attendees, but at least we had a good time. So that's good. For me, kind of piggybacking briefly off of this, you're not alone, right? Anybody that's on this call is not alone. We have guidelines, we have examples, we've got the framework. You're not alone in terms of trying to solve this problem. So, and you've got resources available to you, including the folks that are here. The one thing I kind of want to layer in here, and this is never a product pitch, but mobile is different in one primary way, and we always have to think about targeted attacks. If somebody's going after XYZ agency, they're probably not going to drop an app in the App Store and pray that somebody downloads it from the agency. They're going to do something different, like mobile phishing. They're going to put up a fake Wi-Fi network and have people connect to it. So one of the key things that you should probably look at and consider is the detection in mobile should probably be, I shouldn't say probably, I'm trying to not make this a product pitch. I personally believe the detection needs to be on device. And the detection needs to be on device because if the bad guy owns the network, the first thing they do is they cut off access to the cloud where the detection is. So you need to be able to have something that detects zero-day attacks on device. The other advantage of that, by the way, is depending on the policies and depending on the groups, and Rick already knows this from personal experience, you can decide what privacy information you are or are not going to take. So if you're putting everything up in the cloud for detection, some of that might be considered personal information. If you're doing something on device, then you can say, for BYOD, we're not taking this set of forensics off. For corporate, we're including the whole thing. So it's a fine point, but considering this balance that we were talking about with Jamie of user involvement and privacy, as Gemma talked about, versus security, it's got to be part of the equation. So, but overall, BYOD is here to stay. It's a matter of figuring out how we're doing it. And like I said, I really appreciate you guys. I love these conversations. I wish we could keep going.
Excellent.
Yeah, definitely. This is great.
All right. Well, thank you again to our partners at Zimperium, our awesome panelists. Thank you all at home joining us today. And we hope to see you again on Thursday, June 10th from 10 to 12:15 p.m. Eastern Time for ATARC's Advancing DevOps Throughout the Federal Government Virtual Summit. This summit has panels discussing how topic experts explore the role of edge computing in the DevOps and DevSecOps tools, processes, policies space throughout the federal government. We hope to see you there. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Bye.